Hello, and welcome to the Albuquerque Journal's Town Hall Series, and this one is with Republican gubernatorial candidate Gregg Hull, who is the longest, I believe, serving Rio Rancho mayor in history. If you don't recognize him, he was in our debate, which was live broadcast on C-SPAN last week, and so today we get to hear a lot more in depth from this candidate, who's also the leader in our polls. As a reminder, we will be taking questions from the audience here. Audience members, you can click on the QR codes on screens on the either side of the stage to ask a question. All questions get submitted to me, and I will ask them for you. And those listening to us online, you can also submit questions, and I will be getting all of those. Happy to ask any of those questions that you submit. We're really looking forward to your questions online. You can do so through any of our social media, or you can also do it on the YouTube live broadcast as well stream. Lucas Pierman, our digital editor, is in the back of the room. His hand is raised right there. If you don't have a smartphone and you want to just write down a question or tell him a question, you can also go back and talk to Lucas, and he has cards for you to write questions down on as well. So with that, I'm going to ask my esteemed colleagues to introduce themselves, and then I will give Mr. Hull some time to talk about his opening statements and his career. So, Dan?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Dan Boyd. I'm the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief up in Santa Fe and cover state politics.
Thank you, Mayor, for being back, and everybody for joining. I'm Ryan Botel. I'm the opinion editor at the Journal.
Welcome, Greg. Mayor Hull, glad to have you, and look forward to meeting you and talking with you. And I'm Jeff Tucker, a journal economist and proofreader.
All right, Mayor Hull, why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and I appreciate these town halls where we can, talk about some of the different positions that we have and drill into them a little bit more in depth than, like I say, than 60-second sound bites, because I think a lot of the issues that are concerning New Mexicans today take a little bit more time, a little bit more depth. And for those people that have not met me or do not know me, my name is Gregg Hull. I have been the mayor of Rio Rancho, New Mexico for the last 12 years. Moved my family here back in 1986, moved down from Colorado, moved to Santa Fe originally, working for Oshman Sporting Goods and as a ski technician. And then after that, we eventually moved into the Albuquerque area and then landed in Rio Rancho in the mid-90s. I'd have to go back and look at when we bought our first house there, but raised our 5 kids. My wife and I, Carrie, met each other a little over 30 years ago and blended our families together and have raised our 5 children here in New Mexico and through the public schools here in New Mexico, and now have 9 grandchildren that we are very, very, very proud of. Although I think Carrie would like to see that get up to a baker's dozen, because those grandbabies keep you busy, and obviously are very excited to have them. In Rio Rancho, just a little bit about myself and my focus is I ran for mayor back in 2013, and it wasn't really something that was on my radar. Is that running for office was not something that I really had put any focus on. But as a former business owner, I had owned and operated a packing and shipping company called Certified Packing and Crating. It's still a company that's in existence today and still running and still employing individuals, and it's still locally owned and operated, which I'm very proud of the fact that it has survived the test of time. But that being said, in 2012, I decided to step back from that, and it was really because we were evaluating what we were going to do in life. Our youngest had gone off to college, and we were empty nesters, and we thought, well, there's an opportunity to do something. Carrie had been a long-time Intel employee, and she just recently retired from there after 30 years of working for Intel Corporation. And we thought, well, do we stay here in Rio Rancho? Do we stay in New Mexico? Do we, what do we want to do? And that opportunity presented itself, and we said, well, I'm going to do some small business consulting until we figure it out. And that's when I was approached by a couple of different individuals about the thought of running for public office. And it was like, wow, I'd never thought about this before. I'm literally your blue collar worker that had come out of just regular industry and said, I'm either looking for that next opportunity or just didn't really know. And then literally, and I've said this time and time again, went home one day after a couple of people had asked me this question, have you ever thought about running for mayor? Literally Googled what that meant, I mean, so I went through the whole grassroots process, just the same as when I would open up my businesses, is go through the research, look at what it takes, look at what the responsibilities are. And the more I looked at it, I said, hey, this is really a lot like the way I opened up my small businesses, and decided to go ahead and pursue that in running for office. In 2014, I was elected to my first term with 65% of the vote, and that was in a runoff election, and then was elected 2 more times after that, and yes, the longest-serving mayor of the city of Rio Rancho, and very proud of the fact that I've been the mayor for 25% of that city's history, because it's still a very young and up-and-coming city. There's a lot that's still going on up there. It was started off as really a bedroom community, and really, when I took office, it was in full-on stagnation. The markets had just seized up there. Intel had 1 foot out the door, and we just, the city had just come to a screeching halt and was heavily impacted by the 2008 market collapse, the housing market collapse. There were foreclosures all over the city. All the developers had pretty much pulled out, and there we sat up there on the hill, really just a suburb of Albuquerque that wasn't performing where it needed to be. So I felt like my mission and my goal was to really create a standalone economy and focus on fixing infrastructure, improving public safety, and creating opportunities up there. And, we quickly got the wheels back on the bus, as they say, and got Rio Rancho moving again. And over the last 12 years, we've received numerous national accolades, from safest city to best place to live, best place to raise a family, most affordable communities. And so we're very proud of the things that we've done. And I've worked very hard to set the city up for success, creating the city's first ever permanent fund that is now generating revenues for future generations. And we were the first city in the state to bring our aquifer recharge system online, that allowed us to really look in a forward manner of sustainable water solutions, not only for the city of Rio Rancho, but as it pertained to being a good neighbor in the area with the surrounding community. So there's been a lot there, and I've been very proud and humbled to have been able to serve my community in that capacity. And so that's a little bit about me.
Dan?
Yeah, no, Mayor, thanks again for being here. And I wanted to ask you, Jay had mentioned that you were leading in the recent Journal poll. You also won the pre-primary convention back in March. At this point in the race, with just over 3 weeks till primary election, do you think you're the front runner in the Republican primary?
Here's the thing about that with polling and being the front runner, is that my focus is continuing to run the race as if I'm the only candidate in the race, or I'm dead last in the race. My goal is to get out and talk to voters where they are and make sure that we're meeting with constituents, because at the end of the day, whoever gets elected, the responsibility is to make sure that we're serving the citizens of New Mexico. So I try not to focus on all of those polls. While they're nice, I think that they can be distracting. And so my number one priority is just to continue to press forward, meet with people, run our race, continue to get our message out there about who I am and myself. And that's a focus on me. And, that's a focus on what I believe my qualifications are and not anybody else's. So at this point, Dan, I'm going to say we're just running the race as if no polls existed, and we had no data to that, because we want to run hard and we want to show every New Mexican voter that we're out there to earn their vote.
And just, I guess, a quick follow-up to that, are you kind of, given where the race stands, are you expecting kind of more negative attacks from your opponents? Or, it's been a pretty positive race, it seems like, so far.
I've committed from the very onset not to attack my opponents, is to focus myself on my race and who I am. And as I've always said, my resume is either good enough or it isn't, for some people. And if that's enough to get elected, then great. If it's not, that's a decision that the voters are going to make. And I'm hoping that we will continue very civil discourse as we discuss the issues, because, quite frankly, the issues that are facing New Mexicans are some big issues: education, infrastructure, health care, the economy, affordability, job opportunities. These are the things that on a day-to-day basis that everyday New Mexicans are very concerned about. And when I talk to individuals out there in the street, they're not asking me about my opponents. They're asking me, what can we do about health care? What can we do to get more doctors into our state? What can we do to keep our kids in this state so that we don't see this great migration away from our communities? And really, it kind of destroys or diminishes the total overall legacy of the state of New Mexico. And I've worked on workforce boards, and I've been chairman of the COG, and I've been the president of the New Mexico Municipal League and president of the Municipal League, chairman of the New Mexico Mayor's Caucus. And for the last 12 years, I've worked around the state, not just in Rio Rancho, but all over the state, working with communities and employers, trying to figure out better solutions to keep people here. And I think Rio Rancho's tried to play a good role in that, but now it's time to really build and expand that out to the state of New Mexico.
So Rio Rancho is one, if not the fastest growing cities in New Mexico, but New Mexico on a whole has pretty stagnant population growth. What's Rio Rancho's secret, and how would you apply that to other communities around the state?
Well, one of the big things we focused on was, very early on, was listening, doing the listening tour. We started this citizen survey right as soon as I took office. We put a survey out there. It was very in-depth. It said, what's your trust in government? What do you feel the number one issues facing the city are? Is it infrastructure? Is it public safety? What are the things that you feel most confident in? We've posted all of these surveys online so that we can kind of track the results. Public safety is always top center. People want to feel safe in their communities. They want to know that their kids are going to be safe in the communities. They want to know that there's opportunity for their kids going forward, and they want their kids to have a great education. So when you've seen a stagnated population throughout the state of New Mexico, what you've seen in Rio Rancho is, I think when I took office, the estimated population was around 89,000, and now the estimated population is about 115,000. And so that's a 15 to 20% growth factor, depending on what the number, where you see numbers popping up. But I think a lot of people are moving up there because of affordability. Is that I'm very proud of the fact that the sales tax rate today is the same as when I took office in 2014. And that's because we grew the economy and we didn't just stack on additional taxes. The total overall property mill rate in Rio Rancho, when you take all the Sandoval County taxes and everything else, the total overall mill rate is actually lower today than when I took office in 2014. That has gained us the ranking of one of the second most affordable community in the Southwest, and that's because our cost of living is still below the national average. When you see other communities struggling with cost of living that are 30, 40, 50, 60% higher than the national average, and in New Mexico, that makes a really dangerous mix of economic strain and affordability that drives people out of the state.
So our first audience question comes from Emily Howard, who's the head of Economic Forum. She asks, in a recent poll conducted by Economic Forum, 96% of Albuquerque area residents said local economic growth was important to them. What is your vision for a prosperous economic future for New Mexico, and how will you lead us there?
Absolutely, that is a great question, and the vision that I have is making New Mexico as business friendly as possible. I know that's a cliche term sometimes that people use as sound bites, but what we did in Rio Rancho really sets the example. It's working with businesses, site selectors that are coming into the state, understanding what is the environment they're looking to be in. And they're going to ask these same questions. They're very concerned about the education. If we move families into the state, are their kids going to get a good education? Is there an educated workforce in the state? That is huge. We see that constantly when you have individuals or companies that are looking to locate into the state of New Mexico. They look at that workforce. They look at the educational scores and say, are we going to have an educated workforce that we're going to be able to hire people here in New Mexico, and individuals are going to be able to stay here and raise their families here? They look at health care. And one of the big things that we've seen is that there are companies and even military families that are taking a pass on taking a rotation in New Mexico because they see the lack of medical profession in the state. And that becomes a huge issue when that's what's being said out there. And then, of course, outside of our state boundaries, I should say. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at ways that we can actually work with these companies to overcome these obstacles. You don't have to give away the farm in a LEDA deal or a Local Economic Development Act deal. You don't have to give away the farm. Most companies are just looking for a great place where they can prosper and have really predictable rules and regulations and legislation around business development and growth, and not have the goalposts moved on them every time that something new pops up. And I think one of the things we were able to do is stabilize our relationship with Intel Corporation. They, at their heyday, were at about 8,500 employees. When I took office, they were down to about 900 employees. Well, with the new $3.5 billion investment and the bringing in the advanced packaging system, we were able to get that employment number back up to around 3,000. And that's what you've got to do, is you've got to work with these companies to find out what they need and make sure that the policies that you're bringing forward are not moving the goalposts, but being very consistent and transparent about how we move forward with those things. So I would establish policies that absolutely work with companies to make sure that everything we talk about is very consistent, very predictable, and very straightforward, so that they know what the environment is when they come in and they understand the resources as they exist. And then if we need to develop workforces around the industries, then we need to work with our local school districts like we do in Rio Rancho. We're very, very much working with the local businesses and the industries around the area to say, what is it that you're looking for in a workforce, and making sure that we're creating that pipeline right out of high school, and we're starting to get those kids at middle school and high school ages, and then get them either into a career technical field or moving them into a college field that will help facilitate that workforce.
We're hearing a lot of outrage from the business community, and we're writing a story on this right now, about Meg Whitman being snubbed as head of UNM, to be president of UNM. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I really don't. I haven't followed that story very closely, but yeah, there is a lot of, I can see where there would be outrage around that, and once again, in that particular context, I haven't given that a ton of thought, no.
I wanted to ask you, kind of switching gears, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a lawsuit last week against the state and the city of Albuquerque over recent immigration laws and the sanctuary policy here. Do you support that lawsuit? And if you are elected, what would be your approach to dealing with the state and their interactions with federal immigration actions?
Yeah, so number one, I've always said this, I'm very much pro-law enforcement, I'm pro-following the laws, is that we need to have immigration laws that allow people to move more freely into the country so that they can establish those residencies. A lot of the individuals that I talk to don't want to necessarily be here outside of the boundaries of the law, but we've got a lot of immigration issues that need to be dealt with. And so I am pro-law enforcement. We have to enforce the laws. When you think about illegal immigration or anything as such like that, you get into human trafficking, you get into drug trafficking, you get into a lot of dangerous situations. When we're down at the southern border and we open up a semi-truck full of human beings that have been deceased because they were locked up in there and they didn't survive that, I think that those are some important things that we need to look at to make sure that we're having safety across the board. So I've always committed that I will work with all law enforcement agencies, whether that's local, federal, state, or even surrounding jurisdictions, to make sure that we're enforcing the laws and making it as safe as we possibly can for New Mexico citizens.
And does that mean, just as a fault, that you would support continuing to have those ICE facilities operate in New Mexico and Otero County? And
yes, yes, detention facilities unfortunately are a necessary part of doing the entire process. It is a necessary function, and I think what we need to do is just make sure that everything is being run properly in those facilities, everybody is being treated humanely in those facilities, and as we sort out who's supposed to be here and who's not, making sure that we're not trampling on civil rights at the same point in time. So I want to make sure that people's rights are being protected, but at the same point in time, that laws we have on the books are being enforced.
You talked about healthcare earlier. The legislature this year did pass several bills intended to improve healthcare access, like medical malpractice reform and others. What do you think about that most recent legislative session as far as the healthcare work that they did, and what would be your healthcare strategies?
So first off, I'm very glad that HB 99 made it through. That was a good first step. But I think we have a long way to go to rebuild the relationship and the trust with the medical community, because that opened the door on limitless lawsuits. When we're now known in the nation as having one of the biggest judgments in the country, $420 million, I think, was a judgment that came out of New Mexico, is that sends a message that the medical community is just an open target. So that's a great first step, but I think now we have to go into looking at how we recover from that. And it's not going to happen overnight. Just because we passed this medical malpractice doesn't mean doctors are going to come flooding back in. I was also very happy that we got the compacts that we did through, but we need to get the rest of the compacts passed as well. And what I will fight for is greater reciprocity rules to make sure that licenses are more fluid between one state and another, to make sure that we're cooperating with other states, and if doctors want to come into New Mexico, they can get reasonable medical malpractice insurance, and they can practice in the state without worrying about, jackpot lawsuits coming against them and destroying their reputations, destroying their credibility, destroying their careers. And so these are things that we have to look at to make sure that we balance the needs of the patients. We don't want to expose patients to undue, where they don't have, real recourse against a doctor that has acted negligently. We want to make sure that they have those protections, but at the same point in time, we want to balance that to make sure that we're building trust in the medical community. So beyond that, I think now, once we get this stabilized and we show that, that New Mexico's on the right path here, and we see this legislation taking a foothold, that now how we encourage and incentivize these doctors to come back into the state of New Mexico, number one. So we're going to be looking at various different ways to do that, whether that's home buying incentives, tax incentives, what have you, and really focusing on trying to bring those individuals back into rural communities, because the rural communities are the ones where we just don't have the resources that we need. And then building that pipeline again from the high school on through is working with the high schools, working with our colleges. I mean, UNMH produces some of the greatest medical professionals in the country right here in the United States and in the state of New Mexico. We need to work with those students coming through there to see how we can incentivize them to go into the rural communities and stay in New Mexico once they're here. And I think that there's ideas that we could do that are not dissimilar from what my uncle, when he went to medical school, he went on the GI Bill. And, they paid all of his medical school bills so long as he served 4 years in the Air Force. I think we could do something like that that would incentivize individuals to stay in New Mexico to help pay off those student loan debts. Now, this is important because when you go into a rural community and you're not necessarily making as much money as you might by going to a bigger city or a more populous area, if you're not having to carry student loan and pay a mortgage, it gives you a little bit more flexibility to actually stay in the community that we might have recruited you out of, or that you can go back into and put down roots. And there's statistics and study that show that if you live in a community for 4 to 6 years and your kids are there and they're going to school and you're involved in the PTA and you're very integrated, there's a high probability you're going to stay in that community.
We have a series of questions now relating to President Trump. So Matt Groom, one of the audience members, asks, what is your opinion of our current President Trump?
Well, as opinions go, everybody's going to have a different opinion about the president. I saw a lot of opinions when I had to work with the Biden administration, and I had before that had to work with the Trump administration. We're currently working, we currently have the Trump administration, and 2 years after I take office, we will have another administration. My commitment is to working with any administration that's in authority at the time on the Washington, D.C. level to make sure that we're getting the maximum benefit that we can for the state of New Mexico and that we're working for the citizens of New Mexico. When I've seen, when I've worked as mayor of Rio Rancho, I worked very hard to make sure that we were doing what I felt was absolutely best, whether it was infrastructure, public safety, economic opportunity, education, where we were involved in that. To make sure that we were doing the things that best benefited the citizens of Rio Rancho. My goal will be to work with the administrations to make sure that we're benefiting New Mexico to its best ability.
Well, to that end, another audience member asks, governors always work closely with the federal government. How do you foresee working with the Trump administration?
Well, once again, looking for any resource that we can bring back to the state of New Mexico. New Mexico has a heavy dependence on a lot of public services. When you look at Medicaid, and then you look at the SNAP program, and other programs that we depend heavily on from the federal government. Right now, when I think about infrastructure needs in the state of New Mexico, we have highways all over the state that we need federal help on funding those roads. We need federal help on paying for water infrastructure. We need federal help on paying for a lot of the different, our national forest management. We need federal help in so many different areas. We cannot afford to disconnect ourselves from any federal administration and say we're just on our own. We also have to remember our reliance on the federal government goes back years, decades, because we have Los Alamos National Labs, we have Sandia National Labs, we have the military bases here. All of these add to, have deep roots in our economy here in the state of New Mexico. These relationships are paramount and key. Once again, working with federal administrations is something that every governor's got to do. And I'm going to work to make sure that we optimize what's best for New Mexico. And when you think about Kirtland and Cannon and the other Air Force bases, we want those missions here in New Mexico. We want those jobs here in New Mexico. We want to continue to develop and foster that. And right now, we've got a huge opportunity to have a major role in space when you look at the things that we're doing in space right now. When you think about all of the various different aspects of the aerospace technologies, the military defense systems, the space exploration, satellite, all the things that we have pieces of here in New Mexico, pulling all those together, and then you think about spaceport, pulling all of those things together and really capitalizing on what the investments that we've made. I think we should be the leader in the United States in the space industry right now. And I think that's something that we're poised to do. It's just taking the fundamental building blocks and bringing them all together and seeing how we synergize those things and make sure that when we push forward, we have a message that says we're moving in this direction, and we unify that direction and de-silo a lot of these different things that are going on in the state and find that synergy.
Particularly on the arts, audience member Robert Martin asks, federal funding of the arts has been drastically reduced by the current White House, yet local artists who move into blighted urban areas have had a renewal effect on communities, property values, and the tax base. What is your stance on providing government support for a diversified arts economy of our state?
Look, I'll tell you what, there is a huge diversified arts economy in our state, and I remember being very much a part of that because as my shipping company, one of the things that we did is we packed and shipped a lot of original art that came out of New Mexico. We were the primary shipper for R.C. Gorman and some of the originals that he produced. It's a huge economy in the state of New Mexico, and our tourists come in, they buy this artwork, and then they take it home, and it really makes New Mexico known for the beauty and the diverse cultures that we have in the state. When you think about the pueblos, the sovereign nations, and the artwork and the history and the culture that comes out of each of those, and then just the artists that have called New Mexico home over the years, it is a huge portion of our industry when you think about the various different economies within the state of New Mexico. So I'm going to be very supportive of continuing to support that industry and making sure that New Mexico is known for what it's been known for a long time, is that we've got a lot of really great artwork that comes out of New Mexico, and whether that's sculptures, paintings, glass work, rock work, once again, I've been exposed to it in a different way because when we shipped this stuff, we had to crate it and make sure it didn't get broken, whether it's Kachina dolls or gourd art, you name it. There's just this vast art community in New Mexico, and I think not supporting that would be a huge mistake.
I wanted to ask you, Mayor, there's now almost as many registered independents as Republicans in New Mexico, and this being the first semi-open primary, have you been actively trying to, get out and talk to independents and make that a part of your campaign? And if so, what's kind of been your message to them?
Well, absolutely. But the difficulty has been this, is we're looking to talk to groups of independents, and that's a little bit hard, right? So you're trying to get your message out through mail and maybe through social media and maybe through direct buys on streaming services, et cetera, like that, cable TV, where you know you're going to find some independent voters. The problem is that you don't have groups of them that come together like Republican Party meetings and Democrat Party meetings and other meetings and such like that. So it's a little hard to get them into a room where you can talk to them on an individual basis about how you align with their priorities and how you align with the things that what their vision is for the state of New Mexico. But the independents that I have spoken to, I've heard a unified voice that it's across the political spectrum, from Democrat to Republican to independent to decline to state, even your forward parties. They're looking at some of the same issues that we all are, and that's healthcare, education, crime, public safety being top of mind, and wanting to feel safe in the communities and want to make sure that their kids are feeling safe. So I think that right now in this particular cycle, since it's new, that we have the semi-open primaries. You have to be careful there on how we talk about that, because right now they have to go and choose a ballot to pull. But that being said, I think one of the big things that we've had to do is educate independents that they are allowed to vote. And that's going to be that's big, because communicating out issues in New Mexico is kind of difficult. It's hard to communicate into the rural areas. Even in Rio Rancho, when we would put out a public meeting or we would do something at a park or this, that, or the other, I'd hear it on Facebook. Well, I never heard about this. It's so hard to get information out to people, even though information is so readily available. Getting people to actually open it and digest it and and make sure that they're doing it. So I think the big goal this year is really educating independent voters that they are allowed to vote in the primary this year, and that they get to go and be a part of this decision-making process when it comes to getting somebody elected through the primary system. But we're hearing the same issues when I do talk to independent voters, but the one thing that I've heard the most is, oh, I didn't realize I was able to vote. And I said, oh, no, you can vote. Now what do I need to do to earn that vote?
Mayor, abortion is legal in New Mexico, and there is some taxpayer money that goes through it through Medicaid and some infrastructure grants. What's your position on abortion, and how would your administration be different than
Well,
the status
quite
quo?
frankly, abortion is legal in the state of New Mexico, and you don't change that without the legislature changing it. So whether I agree with it or not, it is the law. Now, I am pro-life, and I'm just going to say that. Now, and in this particular case, my personal opinion is putting money toward building clinics and things as such like that is inappropriate, to use broad taxpayer support of that. I mean, it's legal, and it's a service that's available. But if it's going to be an industry that's basically available to the public, then that industry needs to fund its own clinics and so on and so forth, like so many other places do. So that would be my personal opinion on that.
Turning to, there's a lot of questions on data centers. So we're going to have a whole series of these. We have one from Cliff Ho that says, what is your position on the development of large AI data centers in New Mexico and our ability to provide necessary power and water and light in light of New Mexico's Energy Transition Act and New Mexico's Environmental Department's emissions requirements?
Yeah, so data centers are part of economic development, and they're going to build somewhere. And so what we have to do when it comes to data centers is we have to make sure that they're developed in an appropriate way. There are ways to build data centers today that are newer technology. For example, let's talk about the water that they would take. They now have closed-loop cooling systems that don't use near as much water as some of the old ones that used evaporative cooling systems. And when you're using evaporative cooling systems, obviously you're going to go through a lot of water very quickly. And so when it comes to inviting industry into the state, I'm certainly not opposed to it, but we do have to make sure that it's respectful of our environmental conditions, and water being one of those. The other is looking at when you come to the Energy Transition Act, 20% of that is allowed to be alternate energies. I think that we look at these various different alternate energies with data centers. And one of the things that I think that we really have not looked at very closely, and I know that we're studying it, and I think it's the energy that we can put to use, is SMRs, which is small modular reactors. And you're seeing a lot of data centers that are moving in this direction, bringing that technology. So I think there's an opportunity here. And I think the opportunity is that through an economic development agreement, You require these facilities to have closed-loop cooling systems so that you're not using massive amounts of water. You find an alternate water source, maybe the brackish water systems that are underneath, that are deep underneath our freshwater aquifers. We're not pulling it from the river. We're not pulling it from our freshwater aquifers. Or we find a way to put to use the produced water that we have over in southeast New Mexico from some of the drilling functions that are going on there. Bring that water into play so that we have that available and use that water there. And then have these individuals, through a local economic development agreement, overbuild their power plant. They need to onboard their own power plant, so the ratepayers in the various different co-ops aren't picking up the bill on this. And because you've heard that argument in other states where, oh, well, you raised my rates to build power supplies for this data center, and so I had to pay for it. Well, if you get them to onboard their own power supply, I see an opportunity there where they overbuild the power supply and through a power purchase agreement backfeed that power into a local grid and help actually reduce individuals' power bills through that local economic development agreement. So I think there's some very creative ways that we can work with these industries. But make no mistake, every time we tell an industry that we don't want them here or we push them out of the state, without coming up with a way that we can actually work with those industries, we're sending a message out to the rest of the United States that we don't want those opportunities here, right? As opposed to just working together and figuring out how we can make sure that there's a balance between the needs of the citizens of New Mexico and the needs of industry, which provide opportunity for our kids going forward.
Well, Glenn Landers asks, would you support a moratorium on new data centers for, say, 18 to 24 months to allow New Mexico to develop more appropriate rules for data centers?
Yeah, moratoriums are not something that I necessarily would like to do, because I'd like to move those things forward, projects forward, as we develop out new resources. New Mexico right now, I don't know if many people know this, is on the forefront of technology development when it comes to water resources. For example, Rio Rancho, our reuse water system allows us to clean the water to potable quality and inject it back into the aquifer. There are reuse systems that we can utilize on this water side to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the existing water supply. We're actually using the existing resources that we have. But we have a company in Albuquerque here called Kairos Energy that's doing research on SMRs right now. And the federal government, through the Nuclear Administration, just issued the first ever permits for testing on this, I think in Kentucky. And so if these things start to develop out and we start to build these power supplies out, I think we're going to see some really fast developments moving in these directions that allow us to be environmentally friendly and respectful, but also sustainable when it comes to energy and water supplies.
Well, to that note, would you support bringing microgrids under the ATA?
You know, I really haven't thought about microgrids, but I think if you have grids out there that are, one of the things that I've really looked at with microgrids, especially in Rio Rancho, is how we bring more homes together that have solar systems on them, wind systems, different things that you find in different communities, and bringing those under those grids. But yes, I think if you're going to have an energy approach, we need to be looking at microgrids, co-ops, and all of these different power supply systems, P&M, all of them, to make sure that we're working together to bring about the most efficient use of our energy, but at the same point in time, making sure that we have enough energy to be competitive to bring industry into the state. Because the more we kind of restrict and regulate and push down our energy supplies, the more people that come in and they say, well, you don't really have the energy needs. I remember several years ago, a data center looked at coming to Rio Rancho. P&M just did not have the energy supply to do this, and we weren't really talking about onboarding a power plant on that particular data center at that time. But they did look at the available resources that were available through P&M and said, yeah, there's just not the energy resources up here to get that done. So we need to look at how we're bringing all of the energy grids, microgrids, and all the co-ops and utilities together so that we're working together to supply the most consistent, reliable, and environmentally conscious energy But that's also going to involve every form of energy. When I talk about energy, I'm not just saying wind or solar, but I'm talking about oil and gas. I'm talking about the energies that have been driving our state for many, many years now. So I want to make sure that I'm very clear on that point.
Would you support prohibiting the use of NDAs by data center developers? Tech companies often require government employees to sign non-disclosure agreements as they negotiate the terms for the development of data centers. By the time the public learns about the planned data center, public input is virtually meaningless. Is this secrecy necessary, or is it just a ploy to dampen public opposition until it's too late? For example, Microsoft has announced that they will no longer require NDAs.
Well, and kudos to Microsoft for doing that, because a lot of times in order to talk to these companies before they'll even come in, they want an NDA in place, and there's several different reasons. That's why we have economic development corporations like AREA and SCA that act as independent brokers of these deals to keep it out of the government realm until certain things can be negotiated. For example, I know for years, there are corporations that have come into New Mexico and they're looking at acquiring property. And if property owners or individuals find out these companies are looking in the area, all of a sudden they start jacking up their property rates because they think, oh, okay, well, we're going to get a jackpot out of this if this is a company.
I don't know that anyone's going to jack up property rates because they're going to live next to a data center.
No. I'm talking about if they're trying to buy it, if they're looking to buy that property, right? So a lot of times they come in under the cover of an NDA. Now that's not a new thing. That's been happening for years and years and years. And I think if a company wants to come in, that we should be as transparent as possible about the process. I advocated heavily for public meetings to be held on Project Ranger, for example. I went to the Secretary of Economic Development, said we need to get this done, and he worked with me directly, and we did get a public meeting held so that people could be informed as to what that project was.
For context, Project Ranger is Castilian.
Castilian, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Which was the code name for Castilian
Correct.
before it became public.
A lot of economic development deals come in under a code name, correct, yes. And that's all through the economic development world. And so I'm always in favor of making sure that we put as much information out there as possible, but we do have to make sure that when these companies come in and people find out about it, sometimes states get into these bidding wars, and you get into a lot of various different discussions that are not productive to actually figuring out whether or not they want to come to the state or not. So sometimes those NDAs have a purpose, and then in other cases, I think that as soon as you get to a certain place in the deal, it all needs to come out so that everybody understands what that project is, and there needs to be open dialogue that involves the public in those conversations.
Well, speaking of incentives, another question is, would you support legislation to prohibit or restrict the use of IRBs for data centers? Companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars don't need necessarily tax incentives to build data centers. They can afford to pay.
Well, the IRB question is something that people have asked throughout the years, and it's been an economic development tool. As a matter of fact, Intel Corporation has operated under IRBs for years, and many corporations throughout the state of New Mexico have operated under IRBs for years. These are tax incentives that allow these companies to buy and bring in machinery and avoid tax on those properties, so that they can be in a better economic climate. Now, the trade-off for that is typically bringing in the jobs, bringing in the infrastructure, bringing in the equipment, and developing out the properties. In Rio Rancho, we've negotiated our IRBs to where we do not allow them to take, for example, the school district out of the taxation equation, and so we've been very careful. So I think you want to be thoughtful about where we're abating taxes, but I will also point out that in a lot of cases where you have a vacant piece of property just sitting there, it's not generating a tax base at all. So are you giving anything up really, or are you actually getting something into the state? So those are the balances when you're talking about economic development, because if you're looking at 1,000 acres of just vacant land that's sitting there, it does not, other than just whatever that value is just sitting there, it doesn't really add to the tax base. But when you develop out a company there and you build jobs, Now you have people that are getting paid, you've got money that's coming in, what we call base economic dollars that are coming in from out of state. They're going into people's pockets, and those dollars are, there's payroll taxes being levied against those dollars. There's insurance that's being paid out through those dollars. Those dollars then end up in our local economy that starts circulating around through restaurants and grocery stores and other economic development aspects. So when those companies come here, those are major investments that do operate under IRB. So would I say no to IRBs just flatly? No, but I think that we look at them in a very specific way to make sure that the public benefit is very relevant and very obvious in that IRB for that tax abatement. But quite honestly, like I said, if you're abating taxes on a piece of vacant property, there was no taxes there to begin with.
All right, last of the data set of questions.
Okay, lots of data centers.
Would you support legislation to require data centers to cover the cost of any rate increases that might result from their operation? A number of tech companies have signed on, for example, to Trump's ratepayer protection plan, a voluntary commitment not to impact electric rates.
Yes, absolutely. You know, one of the things we see when you have a company like this come in, whether it's a data center or any other type of company that's going to take a high energy need, and you have the local utility building out additional resources for that company and then impacting the ratepayer's bill. I've never been supportive of that, because now you're financing those energy improvements for that company on existing ratepayers. That does not drive affordability. That is not something that I support. So what I do support is, for example, in the case of Project Jupiter, they'll be onboarding their own power plant. So this will have no impact on the local utility rates because they're building out their own power supply. That being said, what I would like to see is them overbuild their power supply and backfeed through a power purchase agreement, or if they build more than they need, or they find themselves, once they get into their functionality where they figure out exactly what they're going to be needing energy-wise and they've built out this much, then get into a power purchase agreement where they sell that back to the local grid and actually help bring down individuals' utility bills. So I think there's a way to do all this stuff without saying definitively we must you put a moratorium on this, or we must not do this, or we must not do that. I think when we get into definitives where we go with the pendulum swings from one extreme to the other, we've seen how that can be very damaging in the state of New Mexico. We saw it. We saw it with, for example, when we went to the no double dipping stuff, where you had to retire or your para was impacted, and it had a tremendous impact on keeping and retaining local law enforcement officers and skilled individuals that we've invested thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in, that once they hit that retirement age, they have to leave and they can't be part of the para system anymore. It's detrimental to the investments that we've already made. So I don't like to see just all or nothing type scenarios. I like to see where can we find that middle ground that balances the value between the citizens and the company itself, and so that both individuals end up getting a benefit out of it.
What are your thoughts on incentives for the film industry? Do you think New Mexico incentives have been a good use of taxpayer money?
I think they were on the onset, but you know, now that we've seen kind of a stronger development in that area, as with any incentives, whether it's IRBs, LEDA agreements, you name it, with any incentive, we always need to look at evaluating those to make sure that we're getting the best benefit for the dollars that we're spending. Is it creating the jobs that we were promised? Are we getting the employment numbers out of that industry? We've seen this with industries across the state, with Intel Corporation. They had hiring guidelines when they came in. HP, when they came in, they had hiring guidelines. There have been a lot of industries that have come into the state, and on a case-by-case basis, those have to be evaluated to make sure that we're not overpaying an industry or we're not getting the value. We've had, in many cases, it was with Intel Corporation, with HP. In the cases of both of those companies, there were clawbacks that if they did not perform the way they promised for the tax incentive that they got, then they had to pay that back. And so I'm a big fan of clawbacks. I'm a big fan of making sure that we're getting a return on the investment for the dollars that we're either expending or abating to make sure that we're bringing jobs and opportunity to the state of New Mexico.
And on that note, what's gone wrong? I read recently there are only 3 movie or television productions in production right now in New Mexico, only 3. What's happened?
You know, I'm not real sure because that's not my forte in the film industry. I don't know why they've kind of retracted from New Mexico, but you've kind of seen a lot of retraction, I think, in the film industry throughout the United States. You've seen a lot of it throughout the country. Now, that being said, we love it when they come and they film here, and New Mexico gets that notoriety, and our film industry gets jobs, and I know the Actors Guild and all of the industries that are involved in that, it keeps them employed, it keeps them, gives them their health insurance. I mean, there's a lot of New Mexicans that do depend on that film industry, but once again, it just comes right down to, at the end of the day, whether you're a business or the film industry, you're making a decision based on where you feel you're going to be best received and where you're going to come away with the product that you're looking to come away with.
Okay, I appreciate that. Rio Rancho is only one of 7 cities that hasn't opted into the Local Election Act, and therefore you have your elections in March of even number years rather than November of odd number years. Why hasn't Rio Rancho opted in?
Well, there's numerous reasons, and let me just say the Local Election Act is something that is the chairman of the New Mexico Mayor's Caucus. Back before any community opted into it, there were 96 communities that signed on to opposition to this bill, and we fought to get that local option to say, we want to be able to opt into this. We don't want the state to take a one-size-fits-all approach and pull us into something that we feel takes away our local autonomy. And one of the things that the mayor of Rio Rancho and other mayors across the state and city councils, they fight for maximum local governance. We fight for maximum autonomy because one size fits all does not always fit. But moving on from that, there are different factors of this that were driving up costs. There were different factors of this that were taking certain things away. For example, I think there were 6 or 7 communities that had voted in local voter ID in their local elections. This was a big issue because the state basically gave the communities the authority to sidestep the voters' will and sidestep their local charters to just implement this and push their elections off to the counties. In exchange, we'll pay for your elections. It'll put money back in your budget. Now, make no mistake, those elections still cost. The taxpayers are still paying for them, whether they're coming out of the city, the county, or the state's budgets, they're still being paid for by taxpayer dollars. So to say that we're going to save you money is kind of a misnomer, if you will, or it's not exactly what it looks like. But it also puts us in an election, it puts the communities in an election where we don't get to talk about our individual issues. For example, when Rio Rancho runs its elections in March, we talk about the mayor's race, the city council races, our own bond races. You move those to November, and now we're on the same ballot with the Soil Conservancy, with UNM. We're on the same ballot with the local school districts, with the school board member races, the Soil Conservancy races, the SCAFCA flood control races for those commissioners. There's just, all of a sudden, you take a ballot that's a half a page and you turn it into a 2 or 3 page ballot with a ton of issues, a ton of bond questions, and it gets convoluted. My goal was to keep Rio Rancho on that March cycle, which it's been for its entire time, and we have not opted in because when the legislation was passed, they said you can opt in. We're not going to force you in, but you can opt in. Well, now that there's only 7 left, the state moves to pull the rest of us in, and it's like, wait a minute, you gave us the choice, and now you're going to take that choice away? Our community has said we want voter ID. Our community has said we want to hold our own local elections. We joined the town of Bernalillo in saying that we want to host our own elections so that we can talk about our own issues. And I know they say that there's potentially a lower voter turnout, but I would just say that Rio Rancho just had a historic turnout in its runoff election. never had a higher race, almost, I think somewhere close to 18% turnout in that runoff election. That's the highest number ever. So when people are engaged and when they're hearing the issues and they're understanding what these elections are and what the consequence or what's at stake, people turn out. And when it's important to them, they turn out. And it's important that our communities maintain local autonomy wherever possible, and so that we can talk about our own issues. I didn't want to talk about my road bond issue with a county road bond issue and a state road bond issue. I didn't want to talk about my public safety bond issues with a county bond issue for public safety and a state bond issue. And those get convoluted, and if your state questions are first, you know, well, I already voted for this bond and I voted for this bond, now I'm not going to vote for the city's bond. And that puts our public safety at risk. So I think it's very important that communities have a voice and that they maintain that voice and they get to maintain that option and that choice. So that's something I'm very passionate about, as you can probably see.
Best explanation I've heard yet, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is a reason for it, and we want to make sure we fight for our autonomy.
Following up on elections, Aaron Vergara asks, what are your thoughts about redistricting the majority of votes in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces? Will you be a part of that change?
I'm sorry, repeat that question one more time.
What are your thoughts about redistricting the majority of votes in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces, and will you be a part of that change?
So is that, and I'm sorry if I'm not familiar with that question, redistricting Las Cruces, Albuquerque, and Santa Fe into a single district?
So to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. That I'm just reading you the question from
Yeah,
what they
so
submitted.
So I
But
know,
my guess is they're talking about the redrawing of the map from for the second congressional seat.
yeah, so the redrawing the map, look, I have to look at the way redistricting is written. And in Rio Rancho, we went through redistricting, and we tried to combine as many communities that had like interests, right? And if you look at our map, they're pretty consolidated to specific population areas that say this area has an interest, this area has an interest. And then we have one where it's kind of hard, like District 3. You've got Enchanted Hills and Mariposa in the same district, and those are two very different communities, right? I think that when you have Las Cruces and other communities down south that have the west side of Albuquerque as part of their district, I don't understand how those have anything to do with each other. The southern New Mexico issues, I think, you need to consolidate those districts to be in southern New Mexico, because northern New Mexico, central New Mexico, and southern New Mexico, especially southeastern New Mexico, are very different in character and culture. And so making sure that that representation is consistent, I think, is what we're looking for when you talk about redistricting. So making sure that we're keeping these communities as close together. I did question, I said, when redistricting happened, I enjoyed the fact that Rio Rancho was part of CD3. And I actually put forward a resolution saying, hey, we don't want to be part of Albuquerque. You know, so, because we're going to feel a little drowned out. We're going to feel like our voice isn't as heard as much, because in CD3 we were kind of the big dog. But I understood it, that when we did redistrict, that Rio Rancho was part of the metro area. We were part of an MSA. So it did make sense. While I didn't necessarily like it, it made sense. But when you tell me that half of Albuquerque has anything in common with Las Cruces or Hobbs, I question that. So I think we need to be very careful about redistricting to make sure that those districts are very much represented in a way that reflects the character and culture of the district, and we're consolidating those population bases in an area where it makes sense, right? So that would be my answer to that.
We have a series of questions on working with Democrats. So Justin Grinstead asks, how do you plan to work with the likely Democratic-controlled legislature at the Capitol?
So, as I've pointed out, as mayor of Rio Rancho for the last 12 years, my political training has been nonpartisan, because the mayor of Rio Rancho is a nonpartisan position. Mayors are nonpartisan. I've worked with Democrats across the state as the chairman of the New Mexico Mayor's Caucus. I've worked with Democrats across the state as president of the Municipal League, and I will continue to work with every party individual. We have to sit down at a table and have an open discussion. I think one of my favorite things that we used to do as the chairman of the Mayor's Caucus is we'd kind of have a meeting where we'd all come together, and we'd have these roundtable discussions, and in the middle of the table there was a topic. It was water, public safety, gross receipts, tax, you name it. And we just meander around and we'd sit down and have these wonderful conversations about, well, what is your city going through? Well, what is your commission going through? And we would invite the counties in to talk about some of these issues, and we'd work with the Association of Counties. And understanding how these different issues are impacting our communities on a different basis. So, that being said, I think I'm going to be very successful in working with a Democrat legislature or a Republican legislature, because at the end of the day, we're going to be talking about the things that are impacting New Mexicans and how we can make changes that benefit us all. And I've to many of the Democrats that I've spoken to, I don't walk up and say, before I talk to you, I need to know if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I don't ask that question. I say, what are the issues that you are so very focused on that you think that we need to, coming out of the gate, first 100 days, what do you think we need to deal with? A lot of people are saying affordability. A lot of people are saying health care. A lot of people are saying education. There's a lot of priorities that New Mexicans have, and it crosses the political spectrum. And I think we align on a lot of ideas, and if we can set those monikers aside for a minute and just talk about how we best benefit New Mexico, I think that it's going to be pretty easy to navigate a Democrat legislature.
Well, Norma follows up and says, how do you avoid getting stuck in party line battles and unresolved issues?
Well, first off, and that's, once again, that's coming to the table and saying, what are the issues that we can talk about? What are the things that we can align on? Where can we find progress? I know right now healthcare is a huge one. There's a lot of consensus. I don't think a lot of people thought that HB 99 was going to get through, but it did. And so I think there's a lot of alignment on a lot of issues, and there's been some education bills that have come through. We've seen a lot of progress in trying to help make sure that our kids are getting the education that they deserve. And so there are a lot of issues that we align on. I'm going to work to break down those barriers and talk about those issues and see what we can do to advance legislation that works across the aisle. I've had that reputation. I'll continue to have that reputation because, once again, when you get entrenched or dug in on either a party line, or you get entrenched or dug in on an issue, all you're doing is becoming an anchor to the issue, and it doesn't move forward.
At the same time, John Rivera asks that Democratic leadership has controlled New Mexico for years, yet the state still ranks near the bottom in so many categories. What would a Republican administration, whether it's you or someone else, do differently to reverse those trends and make New Mexico competitive with neighboring states like Arizona and Texas?
Well, I think there's some other things there that we agree on, is that improving the education system. That's been something that people have talked about for a long time. How do we lift up our education system? So working very closely with the PED to make sure that we have good leadership at the top end, and that one of the things that I'm going to look at for a PED secretary is somebody that is going to make a commitment to stay there 4 to 8 years, so that we have consistency. Why was Rio Rancho so successful with its school district? Well, it had a superintendent at the helm for over 30 years. That was consistency. That was predictability. That was an understanding of the goals at hand. So building strategic plans around education and getting people into leadership roles that really make sure that we're accomplishing the goals that we're looking for, and making sure that those aren't just political appointments, but actually individuals that are qualified to lead these organizations forward, is something that I'm going to be laser focused on. It's something that I did in Rio Rancho, and it's something that I'll continue to do for the state of New Mexico, because at the end of the day, we've got to put our kids first, and we've got to put the citizens of New Mexico first. And that is something that I am very committed to. Now, once again, getting past this, the idea that we're in a place of stagnation, we've got to move forward on some stuff. So we've got to make New Mexico, and there are ways that we can do this through economic development, through education, through public safety, turn the tide in New Mexico to where we're actually starting to increase population as opposed to decreasing population. And because you're not going to overcome affordability issues with a stagnated or a diminishing population. You're not going to overcome a lot of issues in education with declining populations. So getting that turnaround and getting our kids to come back home. I've got 3 kids that moved out of state. I'd like to get them and the 4 grandbabies back that left the state, so that they can be a part of the ongoing growth and success and legacy of the state of New Mexico.
Last question in this series. Genuine question. Personally, do you believe New Mexico is currently being run well? It can be a yes or no, but really explain where we're failing with the governor now and how we can move forward with your administration.
I'm sorry, led well? Or,
Personally, do you believe New Mexico is currently being ran well?
oh, ran well. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't understand the word ran. I think there's a lot of places that we can make improvements. And I've never built my career politically or personally off of tearing somebody else down. Everybody has their different leadership styles. And so I think what we want to do is look at where we're at right now. I think there's a lot of places that do need improvement. And I'm committed to working going forward. We can talk about the past, we can talk about the failures, we can talk about the successes, but I've always kind of said that failures are an opportunity to learn, and they're an opportunity to lead. And successes, I've always lived by trophies are best kept in a box marked yesterday, because we've always got to keep our eyes set on the future. And yeah, it's great to have wins, it's great to have successes, it's great to talk about those things, but you can't let that stop you and say we've arrived. We've never arrived when it comes to growing our state, when it comes to improving people's quality of lives, when it comes to improving opportunity, whether that's in job creation or education. We're never going to be arrived. We've got a continually evolving ecosystem in the state of New Mexico when it comes to job development, job growth, education, and economic opportunity. All of those things we have to continue to foster and move forward on. And so that's where my commitment is looking forward and not looking back, and saying what we can do to make things better as we move forward.
Just one more for me, and I feel like, I've got to interview you a few weeks ago for a profile story, Mayor, that came out in today's journal too, just for a plug for that. So feel like we've gotten to chat more in the last few weeks than
It's good. It's good.
we have over the last
I hope
10 years.
I'm fun to chat with. So.
No, you are, and I wanted to ask you, Jeffrey Epstein's past ties to New Mexico have
Yes.
been a black eye for the state, and something that's still going on, more than a decade later. What lessons do you think the state should take from that, and what do you think going forward, should be done to maybe ensure accountability?
I think we need to peel back the veil on all of it. The fact that we didn't do attorney general investigations when we had an opportunity to do that, I think that was a major drop of the ball there. And now we have to look at it in its totality and make sure that we find out what happened there. We have transparency, we communicate that out to the public, and then also communicate to the victims that this is not something that we're going to put up with again. This is not something we're going to tolerate. And what happened to them was reprehensible and should never happen to anybody else going forward. And so my position is we need to fully investigate it. We need to find out everything that happened, and then move forward from that point. But it is a black eye for New Mexico. When you think about and hear about the individuals that actually visited that property out there, I think it's detrimental to the state of New Mexico. And once again, it doesn't add to the good list that when it comes to pros and cons to coming to New Mexico and what we've been known for. But I'm hoping that through transparency, strong investigations, we can uncover everything that happened out there, bring it to the surface so that conversations can be had and the people can begin to heal.
I wanted to ask you about college athletics. In this era, the Lobos have had coaches and players get lured away for bigger, higher-paying jobs. There's an effort to raise money to keep these collectives fully funded. Do you think, with all the challenges facing New Mexico, that raising money and trying to compete nationally in college athletics is a good use of the state's resources?
I think we should always take pride in our college athletics. Now, I will be the first one to admit I'm not the most versed when it comes to football and soccer and all the different sports. But I do know they play a very important role in our identity and who we are as a state. And, smart investment that grows awareness of who we are as a state. And once again, bringing awareness to our colleges that I believe we've got some great colleges in this state. So bringing awareness to that and having people actually come here and say, hey, I got my education in New Mexico, and now I want to actually stay here. Whether that's becoming a doctor or any other field or profession that you might want to do that. So I do always think that we should be competitive, but it needs to be responsibly done. As with anything else that we've talked about, with local economic development agreements, with IRBs, tax abatements, any of those things, we need to look at those film credits. Every one of those things needs to be looked at very carefully to make sure that any public dollars that are expended has a clear public benefit. That's what the anti-donation clause is about, is making sure that the dollars that are coming in, especially if they're public dollars, we're getting a return on investment and it has a overall benefit to the public, whether that's through job creation or just, basic supporting the community, right? And so, and creating opportunity. So once again, not the most versed in sports, I will tell you that. I like watching sports, but when you get some of these folks that can rattle off stats, that's where you lose me a little bit. But it's like any other economic development category that you're looking at in the state. You have to look at it from what is the benefit to the state and how is it helping us build on our local economies.
On that note of economic development, I've been dying to ask you this question since you're the three-term mayor of Rio Rancho, home of the largest event center in New Mexico. How do you feel about building a stadium in Albuquerque? Would that be an economic development generator?
Well, first off, it needs to be done very carefully because, as we know, there's a tumultuous history around the event center in Rio Rancho. It was really an event center that was before its day, and it wasn't planned well on the onset. Infrastructure wasn't put in place so that traffic could flow to and from the event center. It still struggles to this day. Now, post-pandemic, when we were one of the first facilities to open up, that drew a lot of attention, and we've seen a lot of improvement in events that are going on out there. So my statement would be is that with the population that we have in New Mexico and the investment that it would take, do we have the teams that can support it? Do we have the economy that can support it? Because we have had to subsidize that event center for a long time. There were a lot of plans when it was put in back in 2008-ish.
Is it profitable now?
Not really, because we didn't see the development around the event center that we had originally anticipated. There was supposed to be a movie studio out there that was back in 2008 when we did when there were some long-range planning documents that were done, and there was supposed to be a lot of restaurants that came out there. And unfortunately, because you had the market collapse in 2008, actually, I think the event center was built in circa 2004, 2006, and then you had the market collapse. Everything just kind of stagnated out there, and you didn't see the growth in the population that was anticipated. So I would just say that you have to be very careful when you're building these stadiums and spending those kind of dollars to make sure that you don't end up subsidizing them, that they can, sustain themselves to some degree. The local economy supports those things as well when you look at, restaurants and things like that are around them, and that's the goal, is to build those things and then put people into an area so they're supporting other businesses. So there's other things that economically lift from those stadiums. But my answer to that would be we want to be very careful. I'm not supportive, but I want to make sure that if we're making the investment, that it doesn't become a burden on taxpayers that just ends up getting paid for through tax bases.
Would the fairgrounds in Albuquerque be a better location for a larger stadium, or do you look more to making Rio Rancho Event Center better?
So I think right now on both fronts, that's a great question, because on both fronts you have to look at traffic flows. And right now you've got some severe congestion issues down where on the state fairgrounds, but that's an area where we're used to that, right? So it makes sense to redevelop that and put something like that in that area, and I think that would help really lift the area, businesses and so on and so forth. Rio Rancho, I think if you continue to expand the event center out there, traffic management plans are going to have to be put into place for that, right?
That's my next question. Would
Yes.
you like to build a new bridge as governor?
Yeah, we'd love, Rio Rancho would love to have a new bridge, but, one that was, dedicated there. But the realities of that are, after being the mayor there for 12 years and saying, yes, I'd love to have this bridge, the realities of that are that it's not going to be a high probability because you've got to go through the village of Corrales, then you've got to go over to Sandia Pueblo, and there's a lot of things that have to be considered to get another bridge. I think at some point in time, we need to look at expanding the existing infrastructure to accommodate better traffic flows. But whether or not we're going to get another bridge anytime in the near future is a great question. Would I support it? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the
But
one we have now is too congested every day.
it is, it is. And when you think about Rio Rancho and the fact that we have a 60% work shed every day, we have the bridge in Bernalillo, and then we have Alameda and Paseta Norte, and a lot of our traffic pushes down to Montano. And so, yes, I think expanding the existing infrastructure, I'd be very supportive of that. And if we could find another place where we could come to agreement that another bridge needed to be placed somewhere between Alameda and Bernalillo, I think the citizens of Rio Rancho would love that. But that being said, you have to look at the realities of whether or not that can be done based on current, where people's properties are, and would the cities and the pueblos allow that to happen. So there's a lot of discussions around that have to happen. But I'm very supportive in that area because, yes, we can always use another bridge. This coming from somebody that's had to cross that bridge for many, 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 many years.
Just a final question. Would you be for building a stadium for United? New Mexico United.
So once again, I would say I'm in support of building a stadium, but once again, it has to be supported by the public. It has to be supported by the economics. So just to say we're going to build a stadium for this team or that team or this team, I have to see the economics before I say, yes, I would absolutely support putting public dollars into that. Now, I love the United, and I think they're doing a great job, and I think there's a lot of energy around them. But at the same point in time, I think, for example, when you look at like an NFL stadium, when they put those into a community, like you have over in the Dallas region, in Arlington, you look at that, you've got a population in that area of millions of people, right? So putting 100,000 people in a stadium is not that far of a reach. But when you have a population of 750,000 in a specific MSA, and that 750,000 would include Albuquerque and Corrales and Bernalillo and Rio Rancho in the metro area. It's a little harder to justify a really mass-scale stadium or a large-scale stadium if you can't motivate 10 to 15% of the population to come out to those games. So it's really a population number. And so once again, we're in a position of a stagnated population. We're not growing our population, which means we're not growing that base that would support a stadium like that. So once again, it's going to come down to the economics. It's going to come down to data-driven decisions. But I am in full support of economic development, whether it's in the arts, industry, or sports, or film industry. But it's got to make sense before we expend those public dollars that we're going to see those things come in for a return. And once again, we've struggled with I love the event center. It's a great facility. It's a beautiful facility, but it has struggled over the years.
Margarita Diaz asks, is it true you appointed a Democrat to your Rio Rancho City Council in December of 2020?
I appointed a Rio Rancho citizen to the city council. And
she says you must have known her political affiliation.
Actually, when I appointed 4 city councilors during my term. And after the appointments, that's when I said I found out what their political affiliations were. I did not ask that question during the appointment process, and you can go back and ask those individuals, but I found out later I appointed 2 Republicans, 1 independent, and a Democrat. And the fact of the matter is the individual that they're talking about right now lived in the district, was very qualified, was very much supported by the people that I talked to, was also voted in unanimously, if I'm not mistaken, by the city council, because I don't make appointments in a box. Is any appointment that comes forward to replace a council seat has to be approved by the council. So in this particular case, they felt like this was the correct individual for this job. Not to mention her credentials as a doctor made her an invaluable asset during the pandemic, because we were able to get real information and get real things contributed to the discussion that we were dealing with on the pandemic side. But that being said, at this point, That individual's been reelected, or elected twice now. So the citizens of Rio Rancho have affirmed that appointment. And so I stand by my decisions because I feel like that individual, all four of the individuals that I've appointed have been elected by the population. And so they've affirmed my decision through election. And that tells me that I was making the right decisions, not for a political party, but for the citizens of Rio Rancho.
Peter Sancerre asks, the New Mexico Attorney General's office has issued opinions concerning the city's violation of the Inspection of Public Records Act under your leadership in Rio Rancho. What will you do as governor to make transparency more than just a campaign buzzword?
Yeah, no, transparency should never be a buzzword, but let me also make sure that we understand the circumstances around that particular case. We had a very tragic shooting of a juvenile, a very small individual. And there was a conflict, in our opinion, between child code and IPRA. And this needed to be resolved. This needed to be resolved. And so, that being said, once it was resolved, we didn't appeal the decision because now we could release the records under cover of the court. Now, if you release child records and it's in violation of child code, we were very concerned that the city could be sued for releasing those records. Now, I wanted to make sure that they were released in a way that was appropriate. But I will tell you, let me just say this, what caused that real upfront start is when we got the IPRA request and our staff was saying, hey, we're really concerned because this involves a child. And at the time, nobody knew it involved 2 children. But what was said to me by a member of the media was appalling. They said, dead kids don't have rights. And I said, well, I guess we need to go to court and find out. Because that was appalling to me. You have a grieving family and a brother that will potentially have to grow up with the lapel cam on YouTube for the rest of his life. You had media members up in Farmington that were requesting, we weren't the only ones fighting this. You had media members that were requesting lapel cam of a teenage boy that had hung himself to death in a closet in Farmington. And Farmington was fighting the release of those images. We were one of the last states to pass legislation banning the release of images of dead minors and dead individuals. And that just happened in the last couple of legislative sessions. So our legislature agreed that something needed to be done with this. And so it did need to be tried. It did need to go to court.
But to be fair, I've talked to my colleagues at the Rio Rancho Observer, and for example, they were doing a story on librarians reading to children on literacy days, and they wanted to interview a librarian, and their interview request was denied by the city. I mean, that seems a little excessive.
Well, and once again, every individual, every entity has a policy when it comes to PIOs. We have a PIO, and the PIO schedules those. What our opposition was is walking in and interviewing somebody just off the street. Is that we have a scheduled way of doing things. Corporations have this. Every city has a PIO policy. They work through the PIO, and in this particular case, we had requested that all interview requests come through the PIO, which is Public Information Officer, to make sure that when these interviews are being done, that the person being interviewed is supplied with the correct information to make sure that the interview is accurate. So that being said, we lean on our library director to come up with these things. These are professionals that we hire. These are professionals that we put in place to work with the media, and then we have a professional PIO, whether that's in the police department or any other department throughout the city, that works through the city to make sure that we're disseminating the correct information. So
are you saying there are librarians you don't trust to represent Rio Rancho?
No, I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that at all.
All right. Next question from David Foster. What needs to be done to diversify the economy in New Mexico?
Well, we have to really establish business-friendly policies that allow us to be very competitive with the states around us and really the United States, because we're competing with everybody. And when you look at New Mexico, when it comes to economic development, we've become the donut hole. You've seen Arizona flourish, you've seen Colorado flourish, you've seen Texas flourish, and while all of these other states have been very aggressive about bringing industries into their state, New Mexico has not seen this. So we need to look at the policies that we see in surrounding states, be competitive when it comes to attracting these types of industries. So that being said, we're going to look at how we can incentivize and diversify, look at our opportunities, especially in the technology industries, the aerospace industry, the space industry. There's even getting further into the semiconductor industry that we've had a foothold in that industry for a long time, but just never fostered the ancillary businesses that could come in around that and really, working through the ecosystem. The healthcare industry, building and fostering that, and becoming known for being the innovative leader in the United States when it comes to healthcare. These are things that we have fundamental building blocks in place for, and I think we just continue to build on those and add those to our economy, and that's going to create that opportunity that our kids need to stay here, and hopefully we'll stop exporting our children.
Rio Rancho, this is from Jennifer Cunningham. Rio Rancho doesn't have the homelessness that Albuquerque does. How and why is that?
Well, quite frankly, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't allow illegal encampments just to pop up. If they do, we go ahead and we address those with the individuals. Now, we approach those individuals on a very specific way. Do you need help? Can we help? Can we point you to help? And in this particular case, we've got a really strong network in Rio Rancho with our faith-based community that helps us meet the needs of individuals. Now, after that, if an individual says, nope, I don't want help, I just want to camp here, we can't allow that to happen. And so we enforce the law with respect to that. Now, moving on from that, we also don't have all the same services that you see that have been offered in other communities as well. So we're still a very young community, only 45 years old at this point in time. So we don't have some of those legacy services that you find in other communities. So I think that along with specific enforcements and not necessarily having a lot of those various different services, we do have food banks. We have wonderful faith-based organizations that help in this area. We partner very closely with them, and I think that really keeps the situation in check because we're dealing with it on the front end and not dealing with it as an afterthought.
Crystal Sierra Zamoon asks, Rio Rancho is never a hotspot for tourism, though I wish it were. It's a major economic development and cultural driver in our state. What is your plan for increasing tourism to the state, and what would you change? Would you change the New Mexico True brand?
No, I think the New Mexico True brand is doing very well. I think we need to continue to press into that. And thank you, Crystal, for that. And we're working on bringing more tourism back into Rio Rancho by having Friends and Lovers ballooning event up there. We've re-recruited that up into Rio Rancho, and we love it that the balloonist came up there, and we've tried to be a very balloon-friendly community up there. I think that's a huge opportunity for Rio Rancho to bring more tourism into Rio Rancho. Rio Rancho is still developing its identity. There are things that Rio Rancho will most likely never have, namely a biopark, because the proximity we are to Albuquerque. Hopefully one day we'll have our own, history museum of the history of Rio Rancho, but those are things that you have to build over time as you move along. But what I would do is continue to promote New Mexico as one of the greatest outdoor states in the 50. And when you think about the things that we have to offer here, you can be mountain climbing one day, snow skiing the next day, river rafting the next day. The opportunities in the state are absolutely incredible. So continuing to build on the tourism and really the outdoor adventures that you can have in New Mexico and the culture and the history, I think we need to really continue to promote that, lean into that, because the more people that come to New Mexico are going to understand what a beautiful, amazing state this is, and they're also going to understand that they don't have to have a passport to get here.
Final question, because we're running out of time, from Tim Sheehan. With the state's issues with CIFD, what will you do to help the children of New Mexico?
Well, first off, when it comes to CYFD, the scathing report that just came out from the Attorney General's office needs to be dealt with. First off, we need to take the Kevin S. settlement and make sure that we're applying all of those settlement conditions and making sure that we're meeting those results that were demanded in that settlement issue. Now, that's going to start with having a director over that department that is certified and credentialed in child welfare, child psychology, and they have real experience in running a department like this. Number two, adding additional resources into our caseworkers so that caseworkers aren't overloaded. Number three, building on the foster system, because I think there's been some trust broken there, and you saw that in the report, that the foster care providers feel like CYFD was being retaliatory toward them if they brought up an issue with one of the children. You're going to have to rebuild the trust with the foster care families. You're going to have to rebuild the trust with the community and build that pipeline of foster care homes that when we have a child that comes into the system, that instead of spending the night in a CYFD office, we have a place to put them right away. So that's going to be critical to building that infrastructure. The other thing that we have to look at is accountability. And I know this is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but we have the Office of Child Advocacy housed in the Attorney General's office. That needs to be permanently funded, and it needs to be an oversight organization to make sure that the settlement requirements are being met and that the veil is pulled back. Because when we talk about transparency in that report, we read time and time again where the Attorney General's office was having trouble getting information out of CYFD so that they could understand the scope of the problem. So going forward, that all needs to be resolved. I mean, we can protect children's privacy and we can protect privacy of others, but we can also be held accountable through an agency that's watching this and kind of runs parallel to the agency as opposed to, self-checks, making sure that this agency is watching what's going on, and when they see something going wrong, there's an immediate reaction response to that issue so that it doesn't fester and grow and become an ongoing problem. So I think there are real results that we can do, and it's just going to be about strategically identifying the issues and moving forward in a way that's thoughtful and methodical to achieve the results that we're looking to achieve. And I know, once again, that's going to take a lot of strategic planning. It's going to take a lot of evaluating the systems that are in place. It's going to look at the dollars that are being spent and making sure that every dollar that's being spent right now is going to the benefit that it was intended to, and making sure that we streamline systems where necessary and expand services where necessary to come away with the results that need to happen.
Would you like to make a closing statement?
Man, you guys have let me just answer all kinds of great questions here today, but I do want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. I want to say thank you for this forum. It's been very important. It's been very informative. And the reality is that if we don't get the opportunity to have these open discussions, I don't know that we really find out where the candidates really are. And this is a big job that we're looking at doing here, the next governor of the state of New Mexico. I don't take that lightly. But I would ask everybody that if you have questions for me, you can email me at Gregg@gregghull.com. And yes, it's Gregg with 3 G's, G-R-E-G-G. So 2 on the end. And then, or you can go check out our website at Gregghull.com, and we any answers that you might have, we'll try to get you those answers as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for your time today. Mayor Hull, it was great having you here. Thank you so much to the audience members for coming out, and for those who are watching online. Our next town hall will be Sam Bregman at, I believe, 5:30 on May 19th, followed by Deb Holland, the last 2 of our candidate series, who are both Democratic, vying for the Democratic nomination for governor. And we would love to have you come to those events or ask questions on those events. As always, you can go to the Albuquerque website to sign up for them or to submit questions. So thank you everyone for coming today, and that wraps it up.